There are two parts to the passage that we read, and they seem completely unrelated, don't they? And that's what Matthew does. Matthew places together stories that don't seem to fit together, but do, to help us to understand something about both of them. And this is a real example of that teaching. So we start with what seems like a really basic idea, at least to us, but it wasn't to the people that Jesus was talking about. Jesus is talking about what are called the purity laws. It's a long list of things that you're allowed to do and mostly not allowed to do. Things like what you should eat and what you should not eat, how things should be prepared for eating, how they should be stored, and then there's rules about washing. In our world, we got very, very used to washing our hands a lot, didn't we, a few years ago? And hand sanitizer still sells by the bucket load. We can see that this kind of advice is good advice. Wash your hands. Wash your hands. Why would you not wash your hands? Everybody knows that you should wash your hands. It's amazing the people that don't wash their hands, but that's a whole different story. Hygiene is important. It's important because if we don't follow the hygiene rules, we get sick. In Jesus' day, there were no fridges. There were no laminated kitchen worktops. There was no temperature gauges. There was no bleach. If you got this stuff wrong, people got very, very sick and often died. And that's all well and good. But these instructions had been linked to religion because everything was about religion. They'd become just as much, perhaps even more so, about keeping the religious rules than they were about hygiene practices. And that seems really odd for us, because why would you link those two things? Well, the answer goes back a long, long way, back to the 40 years in the wilderness. The people who left Egypt as slaves didn't have any rules and regulations. They didn't have a government. They didn't have a council. They didn't even have a Kirk session. For ages, Moses tried to run the whole thing on his own, and then he realised it was too much for him. And the people were God's people. The rules were from God. Israel was a religious state, so everything was about God. They didn't at that time have a king, they had priests. So that made everything about religion, even washing your hands. So when we hear Jesus criticising these purity laws, like he does at the start of the passage that we read, it's a big deal. But look at what he says. Who you are, whether you're good, whether you're as holy as you think you are, has nothing to do with what you eat and how you eat it. You eat food, your body processes the food, and the waste comes out the other end. It's the same for everyone. That doesn't define who you are. It's the stuff that comes out of your mouth that does. The things that you say matter. If you're full of hatred and anger and lust and violence, that has nothing to do with what you had for lunch. What you say reveals the kind of person that you are, because the words come from your heart. And look at the kind of things that Jesus talks about, the list that he gives. Evil intentions, murder, adultery, immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. These are what happen when you fail to keep the 10 Commandments. It doesn't matter that you didn't eat shellfish if your heart is full of murderous thoughts, or lust or envy. He's making an argument that people should live out the law, not just keep the rules. Jesus has been saying this stuff since the very start. The Sermon on the Mount in chapter 4 is a sermon about living out the 10 Commandments, not just paying lip service to them. Of course, the priests, who are literally the purity police, are upset. They're the ones who keep order. They're the ones who judge whether or not you've kept the rules. They're the ones who enforce all the sanctions. They're about adherence to behaviours. These rituals that they've created around washing and eating, That's the way that they keep control. You have to conform. You have to believe in the way that we tell you how to believe. You have to behave in the way that we tell you how to behave. And because, well, it's really important, because if you don't, then God will be angry with you. We're just making sure that you don't get into trouble with God, because you wouldn't want that, would you? And they don't like it when someone undermines the rules, especially when that person makes perfect sense. This is like the ultimate insider conversation. It's a group of Jewish men talking about Jewish laws and Jewish customs. And that context is really, really important. It's important because in the next story we jump to a completely different scene. It's almost completely opposite. All of a sudden we're in the region of Tyre and Sidon, which is on the other side of the lake. And it's about as opposite as you can get. There Jesus and his disciples are foreigners. They're the outsiders. They're the strangers who have no place being here. And the first person they encounter is a Canaanite woman, and she's shouting at them. I wonder if you've ever been in a place where you feel completely conspicuous. Like you stand out a mile. That you think everyone's looking at you because you don't belong. Because you're not like everyone else. We once took a group of young people to the Holy Land. And we were in Jerusalem at the end of Ramadan. And we were in the Old City. And so it was Friday. There were millions of people at Friday prayers. And so the advice was, don't go for a walk in the Old City because it'll be really busy and all the police will be out and it'll just be a hassle. So we thought, we'll go for a walk round it outside. Because why wouldn't you? Well, we walked round the outside and we got to the Damascus Gate, which is really famous. Just as prayers came out, and 2 million people walked through that gate and went, who are you and why are you here? It was a really strange experience, because that's exactly the look on people's faces. It wasn't, it was like, why are you here? What mistake have you made that brings you to this place at this time? And that's exactly the same as we were feeling. Oops. That's what the advice was about. We should have listened more carefully. That's how the disciples feel in this story. They feel like outsiders. Jesus has taken them across the lake to somewhere else. Somewhere that's not part of Israel, that's not part of their country, their territory. They're the ones who will be looked at with suspicion, whose customs and behaviours are strange, whose accents stand out. And they don't want to be there. And then this woman appears and creates a scene. And it's really difficult. There's so much about it that we don't know. There's loads that we can imply or infer, but mostly we just don't know the whole story. What we do know is that Matthew describes the woman as a Canaanite. Canaan didn't exist anymore. So it's strange that Matthew calls her that. It didn't exist because the Israelites had taken the land from the Canaanites and killed most of them. And that brutality had continued for years and years and years. Even King David was still fighting the Canaanites. I wonder if that's why she calls him son of David. I know who you are. Your people killed my people. And yet here we are, with me asking you for mercy. Something your ancestors never showed to my ancestors. I know who you are. And if you're who I think you are, then you can save my daughter, and that overrides everything. I'll even kneel at your feet and beg. Something else to consider, though, is that in this region of Tyre and Sidon, there is small Jewish communities. People who are poor and marginalised, and despite their history, the woman is the one standing here with more power than the disciples. She's not like the Samaritan woman that Jesus meets at the well. This woman belongs here. This is her community. Perhaps this story tells us that social standing and wealth don't really count for much in the face of sickness. But here they are. And you can feel the tension. Jesus doesn't say anything. But his disciples are pretty forthright. Tell her to go away. Send her away. She keeps shouting at us. She's drawing attention to us. Tell her to get lost. What follows is one of the most difficult pieces of Scripture, because in the reading, Jesus seems to be awful to her. He calls her a dog. He tells her there's nothing here for her. This isn't for the likes of you. And she's persistent. She leans into what he's called her. Even the dogs get crumbs from the table. And Jesus seems to change his mind and commends her faith. But surely that can't be it. It can't be that Jesus just hits out with some casual racism and then is shamed into changing his mind. Perhaps there's a different way to read it. Perhaps this is a story where Jesus takes someone else's position to show them how ridiculous they are. Jesus and the woman switch roles. They switch roles to teach the disciples a lesson. Jesus says what the disciples would say. He's just been talking about how stuff that comes out your mouth is the important stuff. The things that we say are the things that define us, that show us who we really are. He gives voice to their prejudice. Tell her to leave. What does she want? Tell her to shut up. And saying what he says, he helps them to realize their impact on others. Jesus, the one who keeps the law, who eats the right things and washes in the right way, gives voice to their unclean thoughts. The woman, in turn, blows open their understanding by voicing what Jesus would say. Someone that they consider to be unclean, impure, because of what she eats, because of her religious practice, because of who she is the one who speaks truth, the one who displays faith, the one who understands who Jesus really is. Way better than the disciples do. This is like acting out the teaching that Jesus has just given them. There's even a nod back to the previous chapter, to the things we've been talking about, to the feeding of the 5,000 and then another 5,000 and then some more probably. There are crumbs left over from the table. 12 baskets were left, remember? Enough for everyone. Enough even for people like her. For the writer of Matthew's Gospel, the fact that Israel is a religious country where there's religious law and that the law is the law of the land and the priests keep order and where God is in charge is really, really, really important. That's because for the writer of this Gospel, Jesus will perfect all of that. He'll show the people of Israel how to live out the law and how to do that so that they can be an example for the rest of the world. After all, if this whole following God thing doesn't work for God's chosen people, then why would anyone else be interested? Israel's supposed to be a blessing to the rest of the world. And if that isn't a lesson for our time, then I don't know what is. We still need to learn that those we think of as different, somehow worth less than us, are created in God's image. We need to learn that those who practice religion in a different way from us have much to teach us about love and justice and mercy. This woman asks for mercy. Mercy doesn't need to be pristine. It doesn't need to be big. It doesn't even need to be protected. It doesn't need to be kept in a pot with a lid and a lock so that it can be parcelled out to the deserving. Just a crumb. Just a crumb will do. Mercy is not like a pie. It's not mealy-mouthed or stingy. It can't be measured, chopped up. It can't help itself. It can't be contained, no matter how hard we try. Mercy overspills the tables of the powerful and the privileged. It's subversive. It escapes in scraps and crumbs, and these tiny bits are limitless. They break boundaries. They render the tables irrelevant, because just a crumb will do. Mercy is subversive. Spills out for all, even those deemed by some as undeserving, as different, as not one of us. It redraws the circle with wider and wider and wider edges way beyond our imagination. Just a crumb. Just a crumb contains more than enough, more grace and more love than we will ever need. So every time that we think it's not for us, or it's not for them, perhaps we'll be reminded of this story, where a woman's boldness turns everyone's understanding upside down, where she receives what she asks for, where Jesus gives generously, not just the crumbs, and where the disciples, perhaps like us, learn that this is way bigger than they ever imagined, and that it's for everyone, including us. Amen.